When we looked at the Energy Transition Commission last March in a report on how much investment is needed to build a zero carbon economy, we ended up suggesting a figure very close to what others have suggested as well, which is we need to go from about $1 trillion per annum being invested in 2020 in new low carbon and eventually zero carbon technologies. That 1 trillion has to become 3.5 trillion by 2030 and then be sustained at that level in the subsequent decades. The good news is that 1 trillion has already become 1.5 trillion or thereabouts over the last 3 years. So we are making progress, but significant more progress is required. What's happening in terms of that progress is that at the moment it is primarily concentrated in the US, where there's been a big increase as a result of the subsidies and incentives within the Inflation Reduction Act. In Europe, where carbon pricing and other regulations are providing a strong incentive for investment, and in China, which is seeing huge investments in renewable energy. But we're not yet seeing the step up in finance which is required in developing countries, in middle income and low income countries. We're seeing some, but not on the scale which is required. When you're looking at the rich developed countries, most of the finance will come in private forms. It'll come from the private financial institution system. It'll come from the cash flows of existing companies. It will come from venture capital and private equity markets. There is a role, even in developed countries, for public infrastructure to banks and sometimes for direct subsidy, but the majority will come from the private markets. When you switch to lower middle income countries, there needs to be a bigger role for development banks, whether they be domestic development banks or international development banks like the World Bank. And probably the biggest thing we are not seeing yet is the mobilization of international finance led by the development banking systems of the world, but then pulling in private finance behind them in order to achieve the level of investment which we need in lower middle and lower income countries. So that, in a sense, is the biggest challenge still remaining in finance. There's a lot of good reports have been set out over the last few years on that challenge, reports on reforms to the global development bank system, how they can get more capital, how they can use their capital more efficiently. But we've got to now move beyond those reports and get the action to unleash this wave of investment that we require.